It was one of those quiet mornings in Los Angeles when the sky was still soft and gray, the streets not yet filled with rush hour noise. The city hadn't fully woken up, but people were already beginning their day, grabbing coffee, unlocking store doors, and heading to work. In the middle of all that, a man walked down the sidewalk wearing a worn gray jacket, faded jeans, and an old pair of boots. He carried a simple black backpack that looked like it had been used for years. His hair was a little messy and a small bit of stubble covered his jaw. If you passed by him, you might not give him a second look. He seemed like just another regular person living in the city. That man was Keanu Reeves. Most people knew him as a famous actor, the face from so many movies. But this morning, no one on the street seemed to notice him. And that was just how he liked it. Keanu was known for avoiding attention when he wasn't working. He didn't travel with bodyguards or flash his wealth. He liked taking the bus or subway, sitting with ordinary people and blending in. On that day, he had one small task to take care of, something simple and ordinary. He needed to visit a local bank branch to check something about his account. Nothing dramatic, nothing planned. Just a normal errand like anyone else might have. He reached the glass doors of the bank, pulled one open quietly, and stepped inside. The cool air from the air conditioning brushed against his face. The place was calm, with only a few people waiting in line. There was a faint smell of coffee and freshly printed paper in the air. Keanu took off his sunglasses and looked around. The waiting area was tidy, the soft hum of conversations mixed with the clicking of keyboards and printers. A few people were sitting on the padded chairs, scrolling through their phones while they waited. He walked up to the machine near the entrance, pressed the button, and took a small ticket with his number on it. Then he found an empty seat and sat down quietly. He didn't pull out a phone or make a call. Instead, he just sat there calm and patient, watching the quiet rhythm of the place. A woman sitting next to him looked at him for a second, then back at her phone. She thought he looked familiar but couldn't quite place where she'd seen him before. Maybe a teacher from her child's school, or a neighbor from another block. That's how ordinary he appeared that morning. Keanu didn't mind. He preferred it that way. He had never liked showing off or being treated differently just because of fame. He knew that many people in this city were working hard just to make ends meet. To him, standing in line and waiting his turn was the least he could do to stay grounded. As he waited, a teller at one of the counters was helping a customer. The teller looked young, probably in their 20s, still new to the job. They were moving quickly, their tone polite but a little impatient, like someone who had already dealt with too many small problems that day. Every so often they glanced at the clock on the wall, as if counting down the minutes until their lunch break. When Keanu's number appeared on the screen, he stood up and walked to the counter. He smiled gently and said in his calm, almost quiet voice, "Good morning." The teller looked up, gave him a short nod, and said, "Hi there, how can I help you today?" Their eyes quickly scanned him up and down. His clothes looked old. His boots were scuffed. His backpack looked out of place in the neat, polished environment of the bank. Without even meaning to, the teller made a small judgment in their mind. Maybe he was someone struggling financially. Maybe he needed to withdraw a small amount of money or fix an overdraft fee. Keanu didn't notice the quick assumption. He wasn't paying attention to how he was being seen. He took out his ID and debit card from his wallet and slid them across the counter. "I'd like to check my account balance, please," he said. The teller nodded and took the card. "Sure thing," they replied, their tone polite but distant. They started typing on the keyboard, glancing back and forth between the computer screen and the man standing before them. While the teller worked, Keanu looked around the room. He watched a mother gently rock her baby to sleep in one corner. He noticed a man in a suit talking softly to another teller, clearly stressed about a business issue. It was the kind of small everyday scene he found interesting. Quiet, real moments between ordinary people. He smiled faintly. He liked places like this. They reminded him that not everything in life had to be fast or flashy. Sometimes just standing in line and watching life unfold around you could be grounding. The teller, meanwhile, was still typing but getting impatient. The computer system was a little slow that morning. They sighed softly and gave Keanu another look. His calm patience somehow made them feel even more restless. "Checking your balance, right?" they asked again as if confirming. "Yes," Keanu replied, still in his kind, gentle tone. "That's all." The teller nodded and tapped a few more keys. They expected to see a small number on the screen, something that would match their assumption. But when the balance appeared, it froze them completely. Their eyes widened slightly and their fingers paused above the keyboard. The number staring back at them didn't make sense at first. They blinked, thinking maybe there was an error. Then they checked again. No mistake. The account balance showed an amount that most people could only dream of. The teller's face changed, though they tried to hide it. For a second, they looked back at Keanu. Really looked at him this time. The calm man in front of them wasn't just another customer. He was him. The face suddenly clicked. The movies, the interviews, the countless kind stories people told online about how humble he was. They had seen him before. Everyone had. But standing right there in front of them was Keanu Reeves, quiet, polite, and treating them like an equal. Keanu didn't seem to notice the teller's shift in expression. He was still looking at the people behind him in line, giving a little nod to someone who smiled at him. The teller's thoughts ran quickly. They felt a wave of embarrassment creep in. Just moments ago, they had assumed this man didn't have much. They had judged him by his clothes, his unshaven look, and his simple demeanor. And now they realized who he was, and more than that, how wrong they had been. But Keanu didn't seem to care about how anyone saw him. He was comfortable in his skin. Fame hadn't changed that. He had lived through hard times before. Loneliness, loss, even sleeping on couches early in his career. Maybe that was why he never treated wealth like a weapon or a trophy. The teller finally gathered themselves and printed the receipt. Their hands shook a little as they slid it across the counter. "Here you go, sir," they said, their voice softer now. Keanu smiled and took the paper gently. "Thank you," he said. "Have a good day." He tucked the receipt into his wallet and started to leave, but before walking away, he turned back and added, "I hope your day goes smoothly. It looks like you've been busy." The teller nodded, too flustered to say much. "Yes, sir." "Thank you," they managed. As he walked toward the exit, a few more people started to recognize him. Someone whispered his name quietly, not wanting to draw attention. Keanu just gave them a small wave and slipped out the door into the warm morning sunlight. Outside, he paused for a second, taking a deep breath. The street was busier now. Cars passed by. People hurried to work. A street musician played a soft tune on the corner. Keanu smiled faintly again, appreciating the simple beauty of the world around him. He knew he could have done that banking errand online. He could have sent an assistant or made a phone call, but he liked doing these things himself. It reminded him that no matter how much life changed, he was still just a person, no better, no worse than anyone else. Meanwhile, back inside the bank, the teller couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. They looked at the door he'd walked through and felt a strange mix of guilt and awe. It wasn't about the money or the fame, it was about the humility. Here was a man who could buy anything he wanted, yet he chose to wait in line like everyone else, speak politely, and thank people sincerely. It was a quiet moment, but it left a deep impression. For Keanu, it was just another small errand in a long day. For the teller, it was something unforgettable, a reminder that kindness and humility are worth more than any number in a bank account. And as the day went on, the story quietly stayed with everyone who had been there, even if they didn't all realize who he was. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm and grounded, that made people feel a little lighter, a little more human. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just being himself, and that was what made the moment special. The moment Keanu left the bank, the world outside seemed louder somehow. It was as if the calmness that had settled around him in the quiet waiting room had suddenly disappeared, replaced by the usual hum of the city. Cars honked, people hurried down the sidewalk, and a street vendor shouted about fresh coffee and warm bagels. Keanu didn't mind. He liked the energy of the city, its chaos and rhythm. It was part of the reason he'd always loved Los Angeles. He stepped off the curb and started walking, blending into the crowd like he always did. The sun had started to break through the clouds, casting long shadows on the pavement. People hurried by, heads down, lost in their thoughts or glued to their phones. No one stopped to look at him. It was almost perfect. Keanu liked it that way. As he walked, he thought about the bank. How easily the teller had judged him, not realizing who he was. He didn't mind. It wasn't the first time someone had made an assumption about him based on his looks. It happened all the time, really. Keanu wasn't the kind of person who cared about appearances. He knew what it felt like to struggle. He'd seen hard times when he was younger. He remembered the days when he barely had enough money to buy a sandwich, when he was crashing on friends' couches, trying to make it as an actor. That was a long time ago, but the memory of those days never left him. They shaped the way he viewed the world, the way he treated people. He knew what it was like to feel small, to be judged. And now, with everything he had, his fame, his wealth, he always tried to treat everyone the same. He didn't want to be seen as different. Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a message from a close friend asking if he wanted to grab lunch. Keanu smiled at the simple request. He liked moments like this where he didn't have to be anyone special. Just a regular person enjoying a meal with a friend. He quickly typed back, agreeing to meet up at a cafe he liked. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. It wasn't far to the cafe, just a few blocks down the street. The place was tucked away on a quiet corner, a small, cozy spot with mismatched chairs and tables that made it feel like home. Keanu liked it because it was relaxed, the kind of place where no one cared about who you were. The staff were friendly but never fawned over him like others often did. Here he was just another customer ordering his coffee. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The barista, a young woman with a bright smile, greeted him immediately. "Hey, good to see you again," she said. Keanu smiled back. "Hey, how's it going?" Same old, she replied, still smiling as she started to prepare his usual order. "You want the usual?" He nodded. "Yeah, that sounds perfect." Keanu found a seat by the window and sat down, looking out at the busy street. The city never stopped, but there was something peaceful about watching it from a distance. The traffic, the pedestrians, the noise, it all felt distant here, wrapped in a kind of quiet. A few minutes later, his friend arrived. They greeted each other with a handshake and a quick hug. There was something about old friends, people who didn't treat you like a celebrity, that made everything feel normal again. "Glad we could meet up," Keanu said, settling into his chair as his friend sat down across from him. "Of course, it's been way too long," his friend replied, grinning. "What's new with you?" Keanu shrugged, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Not much, just the usual. I've been keeping busy." They both laughed, knowing exactly what that meant. Keanu's life was never really the usual. It was always full of work, movies, interviews, events, and there was always something happening in the media. But he was careful not to talk too much about work. It was important to keep things grounded, especially with people he cared about. "I heard you did something crazy the other day," his friend said with a playful grin. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, what did I do now?" "You went to a grocery store and actually carried your own bags out," his friend teased. Keanu laughed, shaking his head. "What can I say? I'm just a regular guy living a regular life." The conversation flowed easily, as it always did with friends. They talked about everything: movies, mutual friends, and of course the ridiculousness of celebrity culture. Keanu didn't understand why people treated actors like they were from another planet. To him, it was just a job. He wasn't any different than anyone else. "Man, I don't know how you do it," his friend said, leaning back in his chair. "All the attention, the cameras, the crazy stories in the press. Doesn't it get to you?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "It's definitely strange sometimes," he admitted, "but I try not to let it change me. Fame doesn't make me any better than anyone else. I just do the job and then I go home. Simple as that." His friend nodded, looking impressed. "Yeah, you've always been good at that." "Staying grounded," Keanu smiled. "It helps to remember where you came from." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people walk by outside the cafe. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt in its right place. There were no expectations, no cameras, no pressure, just a couple of friends catching up over coffee. But as Keanu looked out the window, his mind drifted back to the bank. The young teller's face flashed in his memory. He couldn't help but wonder what they had thought when they saw the balance on his account. Had they realized who he was? Or were they too embarrassed to acknowledge the mistake? Keanu didn't mind. He wasn't angry or upset by it. It was just part of the world they lived in. People made assumptions. It happened all the time. Still, there was something about it that stuck with him. How easy it was to assume someone's worth based on how they looked. How often people judged others without knowing anything about them. It was a harsh reminder of how fast society was to categorize people, whether by their job, their appearance, or their social status. Keanu didn't want to be categorized. He didn't want anyone to think that he was any different just because of his success. He had always prided himself on being the same person he was before all of this, the guy who just wanted to make good movies, have a quiet life, and treat others with respect. But he also knew that wasn't always easy. Fame made it difficult to stay anonymous. People wanted something from you, whether it was an autograph, a selfie, or just a piece of your time. He understood it, but he didn't always like it. "So what's next for you?" his friend asked, breaking his thoughts. Keanu looked up, a little surprised by the question. I'm not sure yet. There are a few things I'm considering, but nothing set in stone. That's how you like it, right?" his friend teased. "Exactly," Keanu said with a grin. "Keeps life interesting." Their conversation drifted back to lighter topics. They talked about plans for the weekend, catching up on mutual friends, and laughing about the most random things. For Keanu, this was the best part of his day. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It wasn't about being someone people knew. It was just about being with people who saw him for who he really was. The guy who could still laugh at himself and enjoy a cup of coffee without any distractions. As they finished their drinks, Keanu's friend stood up and stretched. "Well, it was good to catch up, man. We should do this more often." Keanu stood as well, nodding. "Definitely. I'll give you a call next week. Let's try to make it a regular thing." They said their goodbyes, and Keanu stepped out into the sunshine again. The day had warmed up, and the streets were bustling with even more energy now. As he walked down the sidewalk, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. There was something about days like this, the simplicity of it all, that kept him grounded. The world moved fast, but Keanu had learned how to slow down when it mattered. He had learned how to focus on what really mattered, the small moments that people often overlooked. For him, the most important thing was not the fame, not the movies, and certainly not the money. It was the quiet moments, like a simple lunch with a friend, where he could remember that he was just another person, and that was enough. The day had started off quietly, but as the afternoon wore on, it was clear that Keanu's visit to the bank wasn't going to be something easily forgotten. For the teller, it was a moment that kept replaying in their mind. The surprise, the embarrassment, the realization. They couldn't stop thinking about it, and every time they tried, their thoughts would wander right back to Keanu Reeves. Back at the bank, the teller stood at the counter, still staring at the computer screen, replaying the transaction in their head. How could they have missed it? How could they have assumed, just by looking at him, that he was another regular customer who probably had a few dollars left in his account? Keanu had been calm, polite, and completely unbothered by their distracted attitude. But the moment they saw the balance on his account, the millions sitting there, it had changed everything. They had seen celebrities before, but something about Keanu was different. He didn't look like the kind of person who would flaunt his wealth. He didn't even act like it. As the hours passed, the teller's mind kept wandering back to that brief exchange. The way Keanu hadn't acted surprised or upset. He'd just gone about his business like any other person, quietly checking his balance and leaving the bank without any fanfare. His humility had struck them hard, leaving them feeling a little more aware of their own assumptions about people. Outside the bank, Keanu was still walking through the streets of Los Angeles, lost in his own thoughts. His mind wasn't on the bank or the awkward moment. It was on something much deeper. He had always kept his life simple, even though fame had given him opportunities that most people could only dream of. But it wasn't the money or the fame that defined him. It was the way he treated people, how he tried to remain grounded, no matter how many times he'd been offered the world on a silver platter. As Keanu walked, he passed by a few familiar faces, people who worked in the local shops, street vendors selling flowers or fruit, and the occasional fan who recognized him but hesitated to approach. He gave a polite wave or a nod, nothing special, just a simple acknowledgement of their existence. That was how he liked it. He wasn't looking for anyone's admiration. It was the connection, the small moments that made life worth living. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his sister. It had been a while since they'd caught up, and he smiled as he saw her name pop up on the screen. He quickly typed a response, letting her know he'd be free later to chat. They'd grown up close, and even though their lives had taken very different paths, they still shared a deep bond. He appreciated those moments of connection with family, They helped him stay true to himself. A few blocks ahead, Keanu noticed a small bookstore on the corner. It wasn't a large chain store, just a cozy little place with books stacked high on wooden shelves and a sign in the window that said, "Book lovers welcome." Keanu loved books, not just the ones he'd read for work, but the ones that took him to different worlds, the ones that helped him get lost in another time, place, or life. Without thinking too much about it, he walked inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped in, and the smell of old pages and coffee hit him right away. It was the kind of place where you could spend hours browsing, lost in a sea of stories. Keanu liked the calm that bookstores offered. No one expected anything from you. You could just walk in, pick up a book, and read in peace. The bookstore was mostly empty, except for an older woman sitting behind the counter, reading a novel. She looked up briefly, and when she saw Keanu, her face didn't change. She didn't look surprised or excited. She just nodded at him, like she would any other customer. Keanu smiled and walked over to the fiction section. He started browsing the shelves, his fingers lightly grazing the spines of the books as he scanned the titles. He wasn't in any rush. He never was. He liked the idea of losing track of time, just getting lost in the words. As he was reading the back cover of a book, a young man came into the store. He was probably in his 20s, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, and he headed straight to the counter where the older woman was sitting. He wasn't paying much attention to anyone else. He was too busy with his own thoughts, too absorbed in whatever was going on in his life. But as soon as he turned and noticed Keanu standing there, his eyes widened. He froze, his mouth falling open for a split second. He quickly looked away, trying to pretend like he hadn't seen him. But it was obvious that he had. Keanu didn't make a big deal out of it. He had seen that reaction before. The sudden realization, the excitement, the disbelief. It always made him a little uncomfortable, but he understood. He just nodded and continued looking at the book in his hand. The young man stood there for a moment, clearly unsure of what to do. His mind was racing, and it showed. He glanced at Keanu once more, his face reddening. He wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come out. After a few seconds, the young man quickly paid for his book and left, but not before another awkward glance at Keanu. Keanu couldn't help but chuckle softly to himself. He knew what it was like to be starstruck. He had been there too, back when he was first starting out, meeting actors and directors he looked up to. It was funny how people reacted when they saw someone they admired in person. The older woman behind the counter smiled as the young man walked out. "You get that a lot, don't you?" she said to Keanu, her voice warm but not overly familiar. Keanu smiled back, giving a small shrug. "Yeah, it happens. But it's okay. I understand." She nodded knowingly, then went back to her book. Keanu didn't stay much longer. He picked out a novel and took it to the counter, paid for it, and thanked the woman before heading back out into the sunlight. It was getting late, and the streets were beginning to get busier. People were finishing work, heading home, or meeting up with friends for dinner. Keanu enjoyed walking at his own pace, not needing to rush. He passed by a couple of familiar restaurants, but his stomach wasn't hungry yet. Instead, his mind was still replaying the brief moment in the bookstore with the young man. It wasn't just the look of surprise or the awkwardness that caught his attention. It was the fact that this young man had seen him for the first time, seen him as someone important, someone special. To Keanu, that was always the tricky part of fame, how people saw you, how they built you up in their minds, even before they knew you. It wasn't that Keanu didn't appreciate the love and admiration he'd received over the years. He did, he was grateful, but he also wanted people to understand that he was just a person. Fame had never been the goal. It had just come with the work. Keanu's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the same friend he had lunch with earlier. "Hey, what's up?" Keanu answered, his voice casual. "I was thinking," his friend said. "You've been so calm all day. You're usually more, funny or chatty." Keanu laughed. "I guess I was just lost in thought." "Well, I won't keep you long, but I was wondering if you wanted to hit up that old spot of ours tomorrow for breakfast. It's been a while." Keanu smiled at the mention of the place, a small family-owned diner that they used to go to after late-night shoots. "Sure, sounds good." After they hung up, Keanu couldn't help but feel thankful for the simplicity of those moments. No cameras, no pressure, just a couple of friends getting together and sharing a meal. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Keanu walked back toward his apartment. He was thinking about the day, the people he had met, the brief moment at the bank, and how in the end everyone was just trying to get by. Whether you had millions in your account or just enough to get through the day, everyone had their own struggles, their own stories, and that was the beauty of it, the shared humanity that connected us all. The next morning, Keanu woke up to the soft sound of birds outside his window. He stretched and let out a quiet yawn, still feeling the peacefulness of the night before. It was a rare thing to wake up feeling rested, especially with the constant buzzing of the city. But this morning was different. There was no rush, no immediate need to be anywhere or do anything, just a calm, quiet morning. He rolled out of bed and glanced at the clock. It was still early, but he decided to take his time. A leisurely breakfast sounded perfect. His mind drifted back to the diner his friend had mentioned. The little place had been a spot for years, tucked away from the busy streets, serving warm coffee and thick stacks of pancakes. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had been their favorite place to visit after long hours on set. And even after all these years, it still held that same charm. Keanu made a quick cup of coffee and took a seat by the window, looking out at the street below. He wasn't the type to plan his day too carefully. Most of the time, he preferred to go with the flow. Today, though, felt like it was going to be one of those rare moments where he could simply enjoy being himself, without any expectations or demands from the world. He thought about how much he valued those moments of quiet solitude. It wasn't about avoiding people or running from the world. It was more about having space to breathe, to think, to reflect. There was always so much noise, so much of everything when you were in the spotlight. But in the stillness of a quiet morning when there was nothing pressing on his time, Keanu could just be. After a few more sips of coffee, Keanu decided to get ready for the day. He didn't spend much time picking out clothes. A simple t-shirt and jeans were all he needed. He didn't like drawing attention to himself with his clothing. He didn't want anyone to look at him and think, "He's different from us." He wanted to be the guy who blended in, who could just be a part of the crowd without anyone noticing or making a big deal out of his presence. He left his apartment quietly, locking the door behind him. The streets outside were beginning to wake up, with more people walking around and cars driving by. But it still felt peaceful, almost like the city was still in a slow transition from night to day. Keanu's walk to the diner was a short one, only a few blocks away, but it gave him a chance to enjoy the morning air. There was something special about the way the sun hit the pavement at this hour, casting soft, golden light over everything. People were starting their day, but it didn't feel rushed. The world seemed to be moving at a pace he could follow, one step at a time. When he arrived at the diner, his friend was already there, sitting in one of the corner booths. The place was quiet, with only a few early customers enjoying their breakfast. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, making Keanu's stomach growl just a little. His friend waved when he saw him, and Keanu walked over with a smile. "Morning," Keanu said as he slid into the booth. "Morning," his friend replied, grinning. "Did you sleep well?" "Yeah. It was one of those rare nights where I actually got a full night's rest," Keanu said, taking a seat. "How about you?" "Same. Been meaning to catch up, you know." His friend said, "I feel like we don't hang out as much as we should." Keanu nodded, picking up the menu in front of him. "Life gets busy, but that's why we need these moments, right?" His friend agreed, nodding. "Exactly." The waitress came over and Keanu ordered a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and some fresh orange juice. His friend ordered the same along with a side of pancakes. The two of them fell into an easy conversation, talking about old memories and what had been going on in their lives recently. Keanu appreciated these kinds of conversations. They were real. No small talk about red carpets or the latest film projects, just honest, unfiltered talk between two people who had been friends for a long time. As they were talking, the diner's door opened and a couple of people walked in. They were younger, maybe in their early 20s, and they walked directly to the counter. Keanu didn't pay them much attention at first until one of them glanced in his direction. The young man did a double take, his eyes widening when he saw who was sitting in the booth. His face immediately lit up with recognition. Keanu saw the brief moment of excitement, but he didn't look up right away. He had grown used to these quick glances, the way people tried not to stare but couldn't help it when they recognized him. The young man's voice was low, but Keanu heard him ask his companion, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" The woman with him looked over at Keanu and nodded slightly, her face showing a mix of surprise and curiosity. Keanu could feel them staring, but he didn't mind. It wasn't like he could hide who he was, and honestly, he wasn't bothered by it. He had been in enough situations like this to know that some people were just too shy to approach. They would just observe from a distance, not wanting to disrupt the quiet of the moment. Keanu's friend noticed the looks too, but he didn't make a big deal of it. He just smiled, giving Keanu a knowing look. "It's funny how people react," he said quietly. "You'd think people would just see you as, well, just another person." Keanu chuckled softly, taking a sip of his orange juice. "You'd think. But people don't always see what's underneath. They see the surface, the fame, the movies, the whole persona." "I guess it's hard not to," his friend said, "especially with the way everything's so public these days." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, but I try not to let it define me. I'm just a guy who likes to go to a diner for breakfast, same as anyone else." His friend smiled, clearly understanding. They both fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that comes with years of friendship, where no words were needed to fill the space. As their food arrived, the young couple at the counter had finished their meal and began to leave. The young man glanced back at Keanu again as they walked past, his eyes full of admiration. Keanu didn't wave or make any dramatic gesture. He just gave them a small, genuine smile, acknowledging their presence without making a big deal about it. The couple seemed surprised, as if they had expected Keanu to react in some way. But instead, he was just a regular guy in a booth enjoying a quiet meal. They quickly exited the diner, and Keanu could hear the soft jingle of the door as it closed behind them. "See?" Keanu said to his friend, still smiling. "That's what it's all about." "What do you mean?" his friend asked, raising an eyebrow. "The small moments, the quiet connections," Keanu explained. "I don't need to be treated like I'm someone special. I'm just a guy here having breakfast with a friend." His friend leaned back in his seat, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I get it." They spent the next hour talking more, laughing about old stories from their time working together and catching up on things they'd missed. By the time they finished their meal, the diner had filled up a little, and the noise of people chatting and laughing around them reminded Keanu of how life always moved forward. When it was time to leave, Keanu stood up, paying for the meal before walking out the door. The fresh air greeted him as they stepped back onto the street, the sun now high in the sky. He felt good, at peace with himself. "Same time next week?" his friend asked, putting his arm around Keanu's shoulder as they walked down the street together. "Definitely," Keanu replied, feeling grateful for the simplicity of moments like this. He didn't need fame or wealth to feel complete. It was these simple moments with people who understood him that kept him grounded, kept him real, and that was more than enough. As they parted ways, Keanu continued down the street, heading back to his apartment. The city around him was alive, but he felt like he was in his own world. A world where the noise and chaos of fame didn't matter. A world where he was just a guy enjoying life one day at a time. The following days passed quickly for Keanu. As always, his schedule was full. Phone calls, meetings, some filming, and the occasional interview. Yet despite all the busyness, he felt more at peace than he had in a long time. His time in the diner with his friend, the quiet moments of reflection, the simplicity of just existing without the weight of expectations, all of it had brought a calm he hadn't realized he'd been missing. There was a certain beauty in the mundane. People often thought that celebrities lived lives full of grand moments, luxury, and constant excitement. But for Keanu, it was the small, quiet times that truly filled him up. It was the early mornings spent with a cup of coffee and a book, the casual walks through the streets of Los Angeles, and the honest conversations with close friends that gave him a sense of contentment. On one particular evening, Keanu was winding down at his apartment after a long day of work. The sun had set, casting the sky in deep shades of purple and orange. He was sitting by the window looking out over the city, letting his mind wander. He had always been someone who enjoyed the solitude of his space. The apartment was cozy, with soft lighting and a few personal touches, bookshelves filled with novels, old vinyl records, and photographs from travels and movie sets. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. It was a text message from a friend he hadn't heard from in a while. Keanu smiled, picking up the phone and reading the message. "Hey, how about we catch up soon?" "It's been ages." Keanu thought for a moment, then replied with a quick message. "Sounds good. Let's set something up." It was a simple message, but it felt good. It reminded him of the connections that mattered most to him. Sure, he was busy, and his life often felt like a whirlwind, but at the end of the day it was these small connections that made everything worthwhile. The people who understood him, who didn't just see the famous actor but saw him for who he truly was. Later that week, Keanu found himself once again walking through the city, this time with a bit more purpose. He had a lunch date with an old colleague, someone he had worked with in the past but hadn't had the chance to speak with much since. The meeting wasn't urgent, but it was a chance to reconnect, share stories, and talk about life outside of work. He arrived at the cafe a little early, as he often did. He liked to have a few moments to himself before meeting someone, to settle in and mentally prepare for the conversation. He ordered a coffee and found a small table by the window. It wasn't long before his colleague walked in, and as soon as Keanu saw them, he stood up with a smile. They exchanged a quick hug, and after sitting down, the conversation flowed easily. There was no need for pleasantries. The comfort of old friendships meant that they could get right to the heart of things. They spoke about the challenges they had faced in their careers, the changes they had experienced, and the moments of growth that had come with time. Keanu listened intently as his colleagues shared their thoughts, but he also reflected on his own journey. He thought about how much he had learned over the years, not just about acting, but about life. Fame had brought its own set of challenges, but it had also given him the opportunity to understand the value of simplicity, of real relationships, and of staying grounded no matter how high you rise. As they continued talking, Keanu felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people in his life, the ones who had been there since the early days, the ones who had never treated him differently because of his career. It was a humbling feeling to know that, no matter where he went or what he did, he always had these connections that kept him centered. They spent a few hours at the cafe, laughing and reminiscing about old times. When it was time to leave, Keanu felt a sense of warmth. It wasn't just the food or the pleasant conversation, but the feeling that he wasn't alone. In a world that often felt fast-paced and overwhelming, he found comfort in the simple moments of connection. The following days were filled with more of these quiet moments. He met up with a few other friends, grabbed coffee with some old acquaintances, and spent time reflecting on the things that mattered most to him. He kept returning to the same thought. Life was about balance. It was about finding joy in the everyday things, in the small victories, and in the people who made life worth living. One evening, as he sat on his couch, scrolling through social media, Keanu came across a post from a fan. It was a simple message, just a picture of one of his movies with a caption that read, "Keanu's films have always made me feel less alone." The message stopped him for a moment. It was humbling to know that something he had done, something he had put his heart into, had had such a positive impact on someone's life. He didn't often think about the influence his work had on others, but moments like this made him pause and appreciate the connection that existed between him and his fans. Keanu wasn't the type to seek validation or recognition, but there was something meaningful about knowing that the work he had done over the years had resonated with people, had touched their hearts in some way. It reminded him that no matter how famous he became, he would always be part of something bigger than himself. He would always be connected to the world through his work, through the people he met, and through the simple acts of kindness that made life truly meaningful. The next morning, Keanu received a call from his sister. It was a regular catch-up call, but it felt different this time. There was a warmth in her voice that made him smile. She asked him how he was doing, and for the first time in a while, Keanu realized just how much he had been enjoying the peace and simplicity of his life. "I'm good," he said, his voice calm and genuine. "I've been reflecting a lot lately, just about life in general." His sister laughed softly. "You always get philosophical, don't you?" Keanu chuckled. "I guess I do. But it feels like everything is a little clearer now. I've got a good balance, and I'm learning to appreciate the quiet moments more." "Good. I'm glad to hear that. Life can get so crazy sometimes," she said. "But it's nice to know that you're enjoying it." Keanu smiled to himself. He knew she was right. Life had its challenges, but it also had its quiet rewards. It wasn't about chasing after the next big thing or constantly looking for more. It was about finding peace in the present moment, in the people around you and in the small, everyday things that often went unnoticed. After the call, Keanu went for a walk through the city, as he often did when he needed some time to think. The streets were alive with people going about their business, but Keanu felt detached from the chaos. He was moving through it, but he didn't feel like he was part of it. He was just someone observing the world around him, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells, and feeling a deep sense of connection to everything. As he walked, he passed by the same bookstore he had visited a few days earlier. The memory of the woman behind the counter and the young man who had recognized him came rushing back. It was funny how something as small as a visit to a bookstore could make such an impact. Keanu felt a smile spread across his face as he realized that, despite all the fame and attention he had received over the years, it was these small moments that stayed with him the longest. He stopped for a moment, looking through the window at the rows of books inside. He wondered what the next chapter of his life would look like. He didn't know the answer, but for the first time in a long while he felt content with the uncertainty. Life was an ongoing story, and he was happy to be living his own, one day at a time. Keanu took a deep breath and walked away from the window, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. For now, though, he was happy to just enjoy the journey,